Good afternoon. Welcome to the MSDE Formative Assessment Team's third webinar, The Role of the Student in Formative Assessment. For those of you who have not joined us on our previous webinars, Formative Assessment for Maryland Educators, or as we like to call FAME, is a blended professional development program designed to guide you through the formative assessment process and deepen its implementation in your classroom, your school, your districts, and across the state of Maryland. Today's webinar, we will discuss key shifts in a formative classroom, research on how these shifts increase, accelerate student learning, value of peer and self-assessment, cultural changes in the classroom and school, expectations for our Cohort 1 teachers and teams, important registration information, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. But first, let me introduce our team here at MSDE. I'm Denise Stringer. I'm a former special education teacher. I taught in Delaware and Baltimore County, but for the past 8 years, I've worked for the University of Maryland College Park and ICAT Resources, providing professional development to schools implementing instructional consultation teams in Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia. Melissa Straub is our project manager. Her career started in the Baltimore City schools, where she taught 4th and 5th grade, and she has had extensive experience providing professional development and technical assistance in the areas of math and language arts. She's our fearless leader in providing high-quality formative assessment professional learning to all Maryland educators. Kyla Dunn comes to MSDE from DC Public Schools, where she was an instructional coach and educator for the past 4 years. She also helped develop DC Public Schools ELA and Math Scope and Sequence and rollout for Common Core state standards. Gregory Fulkerson comes to our team with over 16 years of curriculum, instruction, assessment, and professional development experience. Gregory was a part of a number of other Race to the Top projects in which he collaborated with other Department of Education specialists. Gregory can provide content-specific assistance on world language, ELL, CTE, and gifted and talented. Now I'd like to turn it over to our wonderful partners at WestEd, Nancy Gerzon and Laura Jackson.
Hello everyone, this is Nancy Gerzon, and I'm very pleased to be here today to have an opportunity to talk about the FAME project, and in particular to focus on today's webinar content, which is really about what are the outcomes of an effective formative assessment process, and what do we see in terms of changes that students and teachers have in terms of their role as learners through participating and learning about formative assessment over time. I'd like to just tell you a little bit about myself and my colleague Laura Jackson before we begin the webinar, so you can have a sense of the content expertise that we bring and also our perspective on best ways to support our learning community to do this kind of work. I've been working in formative assessment for the past 8 years. I've worked at the state level in terms of implementing statewide projects. I've also cut my teeth at the district and school level and worked extensively with supporting classroom teachers to use formative assessment in all content areas. I've worked with coaches, I've worked with content area coaches, I've worked with principals and lead teachers, and also done a tremendous amount of leadership development in this area. For me, where the rubber meets the road is doing this work in the classroom and directly supporting teachers to think about and explore ways to enhance their existing practice. Laura Jackson comes to us from the Rhode Island Department of Education, where she was responsible for leading the statewide rollout of the formative assessment course that was run under Race to the Top. She also has significant experience with many other Race to the Top initiatives, including developing teacher evaluation systems and SLOs, and working on other data projects. Laura is able to translate that connection between Race to the Top work and the relationship of formative assessment. So for example, how does formative assessment work within Common Core and other statewide implementations under Race to the Top? So we're very glad to be able to share this expertise with you as we move forward in our work together. Our work today will be focused on the role of the student in formative assessment. We'll assume that each of you on the webinar understands the definition of classroom formative assessment as a process, a definition which describes teachers and students working together to collect and evaluate evidence of learning and using that evidence while learning is taking place so that students are ready to take next steps. We'll explore today, through our own personal examples of working with teachers across the years and through exemplars from videos from both this country and abroad, how that change in the student role takes shape, and in particular the role of the teacher in supporting students to change approaches to learning so that they have more ownership and empowerment over the work that they're doing. We'll take a look today at some key approaches that support student ownership, such as how students internalize learning goals, use effective feedback, and how students learn to come about using metacognitive skills to better understand how they're learning. In addition, today we'll share a few ideas from research and focus on how FAME, Formative Assessment for Maryland Educators, supports educators to develop these classroom formative assessment strategies. In this slide, you'll see a picture of Dylan William, who is an international leader in formative assessment and one of the authors of the seminal work Inside the Black Box, a work which defined, or I think began to define for the field, what it is about formative assessment that benefits student learning. In this clip we're about to show, Dylan William raises the idea that adopting formative assessment requires both changes to teacher practice as well as significant changes in the role of the student. In particular, one of those changes is helping students give formative feedback through peer assessment. Listen for how he describes the power of peer assessment in helping both the student who gives feedback and the student who receives feedback. We'll come back to these ideas throughout the webinar as we observe videos showcasing peer tutoring, peer feedback using rubrics, and an elementary teacher helping students think about their thinking.
When we started working on formative assessment, or assessment for learning as it's sometimes called, we were focusing very much on feedback. So we started with feedback because that's where the research was most clearly organized. We then realized that unless you asked the right question, then feedback wasn't very useful. So questioning and feedback came into the equation together. As we worked with teachers to implement this in classrooms, we discovered you couldn't change what the teacher was doing without changing what the students were doing. And in particular, the importance of student self-assessment, what we sometimes call activating students as owners of their own learning, and peer assessment, or what we sometimes call activating students as teaching resources for one another, assume a much greater salience. Now, when we talk about peer assessment, a lot of people immediately assume we're just talking about having kids marking each other's work so that the teacher doesn't have to do it. And people always get the wrong idea, because that's summative peer assessment. What we have discovered is that formative peer assessment, where students are helping each other improve their work, has benefits for the person who receives feedback, but also has benefits for the person who gives the feedback. Because in thinking through what it is that this piece of work represents and what needs to happen to improve it, the students are forced to internalize the success criteria. And they're able to do it in the context of somebody else's work, which is less emotionally charged than your own. So what we see routinely now, we see it very, very commonly, is when students have given feedback to others about a piece of work, their own subsequent attempts at that same work are much improved because they are now much clearer about what good work in that task looks like. So that's been, and I think one of the real breakthroughs is just the real benefit of peer and self-assessment, both for the person who is doing the assessment, self-assessment, and the person who's giving feedback, the peer assessment. We see students being very, very effective commentators on each other's work and giving very, very sound advice. Sometimes a lot harder than the teacher would give. One of the things that you see quite routinely in classrooms is children being much tougher on each other than the teacher would dare to be because of the emotional relationships and the power relationships there. But actually, it's generally pretty much spot on.
Okay, hi, this is Laura. We know that peer assessment is a familiar concept to you, but what might feel a little different about what Dylan William was just describing is how formative peer assessment can be used to really advance learning and how it can be a stepping stone to self-assessment. As we mentioned in the last webinar, much of the content of the FAME program will not feel brand new to you. Rather, it shines a light on many of the things that we know are part of good instructional practice and helps teachers develop routines and use these practices more strategically and more effectively. So to that end, the first concept that defines a formative classroom that we want to focus on is student ownership of learning goals. Again, learning goals are something that teachers are quite accustomed to thinking about, articulating them in lesson plans and maybe posting them in the classroom. But in this program, we really press teachers to clarify for each lesson not only what the learning goal is, but how they're helping students understand what they are learning and why. This is really the foundation of creating a more active role for students in the classroom, because until they understand what's expected of them at a very concrete level, they'll not be able to monitor their own progress, effectively use feedback that's given to them, or give useful feedback to peers. So a goal of FAME is to help teachers develop instructional approaches to make sure that the student can answer the questions, where am I going, where am I now, and how do I close that gap? I'd like to activate your thinking about this concept by having you reflect on where you think your current students are with regard to ownership of learning goals. So think about the statement, in my classroom, students have internalized the learning goals and understand expectations for quality work. And we know that some of you on the line may be administrators or might not directly instruct students, so you can think about this as the students in my school or the students in my district. To vote, you're going to hover over the icon on the left-hand panel that has a small A in it, and you'll select the option A, B, C, or D that best describes your students. So we'll give you just a moment to find that icon and select A, B, C, or D. Okay, great. I'm seeing a few people start to put in their votes. We'll wait just probably another 10 seconds or so. Great. So I'm going to share with you the results so that you can see kind of the spread we have in the room. And I'll make it a little bit larger. So you can see, though we didn't have everyone participate on that, there is quite a spread, with most people saying that this is happening to some extent, fewer people who feel like it's happening to a great extent, and some people who feel like it's happening not at all at this point. So thank you for participating. Nancy, if you want to chime in.
This is such an interesting point because teachers we've worked with tell us that they've been posting learning goals for some time, but that the strategies that they were using around this concept of posting learning goals were simply not enough to create a culture where students were really actively exploring, thinking about, and internalize the learning goal in relation to their knowledge, and in particular in relation to what else they would need to learn or do to deepen their understanding. And this is really what Dylan William was referring to. When I think about this, I think the test for this is that any person can walk into a classroom, ask students what they're doing, and that the student can tell you what they're doing, and more importantly, the student can tell you why it's valuable for them to learn that concept. For example, when I was working at a school in a very poor, rural, primarily immigrant farming community, and now several years after our work together is now one of the highest performing elementary schools in its state, a 5th grade student I spoke with in his classroom told me the following when I asked him about the learning goal he was working on when I happened to come in. He said to me, "We're learning about the weather cycle and focusing on what is a drought and what causes droughts. This is important to me because at my farm we use a well. When other farms are drawing from their wells, we have to understand underground water levels in our aquifer. I'm going to learn about how underground water is affected by drought. That's my next step." This student really focused on what Dale and William talked about, which is that the student has internalized the learning goal and has had an opportunity to think about why this goal is important. As we move ahead through the webinar, think about this idea as you hear and see other examples of student ownership of learning goals.
Great, thanks. Another example that we want to share with you is from Patricia's second grade science class. Patricia is a teacher in Rhode Island who participated in the pilot of our professional development initiative. After the pilot, which took place over the course of about 4 months, she very graciously agreed to let us come in and observe her students engaging in an inquiry task as part of their unit on the life cycle of the mealworm. So when we visited, we heard students who were excitedly discussing the various stages of life that their mealworms were in, categorizing them based on observable characteristics, and kindly reminding each other not to use feeling words in their observations. So what did the teacher learn or do in order to enable this to occur? Well, like many teachers that we've worked with, Patricia had already been actively working on creating a classroom culture that was more student-centered. But learning about formative assessment provided a chance for her to become more intentional about how she taught students to understand quality in their work. A concept that's central to FAME and Patricia's class is the use of success criteria, which define very clearly what it looks like to meet the learning goal. And when students are involved in the process of constructing the success criteria, they're empowered to recognize good work when they see it and make corrections when work is not meeting those criteria. In addition, Patricia had created the opportunity for students to apply what they were learning by actually raising and observing mealworms in their classroom. So as a result, they understood very clearly why they were learning what they were learning about, for example, what mealworms need to live, or about the characteristics of mealworms at various stages, and how to make observations, because they were actually engaging in that work. Finally, what really struck us when we were visiting was the degree to which the students were running the classroom and taking responsibility for their learning. So during that class period that we were observing, Patricia did very little direct instruction. The students were working in groups, really pushing each other's thinking, correcting each other's language, and she was able to spend most of her time observing their conversations and posing questions. And so when students got stumped, which they did, she would ask questions like, well, where could you find the answer to that? And she acknowledged that in the past, before thinking deeply about formative assessment and a student-centered classroom, she probably would have just given them the answer in an effort to move on and make sure the lesson went smoothly. But she recognized that they were learning so much more, both in terms of the content and the process, by using resources and each other as resources in order to find those answers without having to rely on the teacher. There is ample research to support this idea that teachers must be transparent with students about what they are learning and why, in order for students to really engage with and take control of their next steps in learning. So you can see here on the slide how John Hattie speaks about the importance of this first step. He describes that it is only by making learning goals explicit and challenging that students can be actively involved in assessing their own progress toward that goal. We'd like to share with you another short video clip in which you'll see some high school math students, many of whom are English language learners, working in peer tutoring pairs. And as you watch, we'd like for you to look for evidence of student ownership of the learning goals. So how can you tell that they know what they're learning and why? You'll have to scroll down and select that one.
What is that?
Yes. Peer-to-peer tutoring is being responsible for each other's learning, being able to help each other and learn from each other.
Okay, you see, this one is longer size, you know that, and there's formula.
I pair each student who didn't pass their test with somebody who passed. So I have a folder for each pair, and in there they put in the things that they had worked on.
And then that's
The reason we choose to do the majority of our projects in groups
is because we want students who are at multiple levels to all move forward and to support each other.
And then the second one, cosine of the angle, cosine x is 15.
If I know more, trying to explain what I know in English to someone else is still a learning experience for me. I may know something about this, but I've never had to explain it before. So I'm growing in my communication skills, and I'm deepening my cognitive understanding.
And then that's what the formula was saying.
And not just a tutor is getting something out of the tutoring session. It's also a tutor, because you now have to think about how I have to break it down.
Let me give you more examples. Let's say this is A, this is B, this is C. Yeah, we're then we're going to use Pythagorean theorem.
So when the groups are heterogeneous in terms of the academic levels, everybody's learning. Some are learning how to teach, some are making sure that they learn from their peers.
You add them together, right? You get this value. And I think we have to divide now, right? No, for equation, we have to left one variable in here.
And then the right triangle is hypotenuse.
Yes. The kids are taking ownership. Like, this is my responsibility. I gotta make sure this person understands, this person learns. And it has allowed them to be a little more humble too.
Okay, so let's unpack that clip a little bit. We want you to think about what were students doing or saying that suggests that they have ownership over the learning goals, and what structures or class norms allowed for this activity to work. And we invite you to reflect on that and enter that into the chat at this time. As you're doing that, I'd like to call your attention to two things that we saw in this video that we thought were quite special. First, students are independently engaging in genuine dialogue about the academic content. So you don't see them sort of slacking off and wasting time until the teacher comes to check on them, nor are they dependent on the teacher to tell them whether something is good work or they're done. They know what they're working on and what it looks like to meet that goal. The second thing that was quite clear is that it's understood in this classroom, and you heard one of the teachers articulate this, that everyone has a next step. So those who are still trying to reach proficiency with the concept know what they're focused on. And those who have met it are deepening their understanding by figuring out how to communicate about that concept and teach it to a peer. The FAME program supports teachers to develop a range of strategies that help students understand and take ownership of their learning goals. So in Module 2 in particular, teachers learn how to clearly identify learning goals, develop strategies for making these goals clear to students through the co-construction of success criteria, as well as the concept of learning progressions and how teachers and students can use them to think about where each student is and what an appropriate next step would be for them. Teachers with whom we've worked and who we would say are now quite proficient in formative assessment have told us that it took a long time for them to fully understand the role of students in the classroom. But they've also reported that these foundational elements were key in using classroom formative assessment to change the culture and more fully engage students in the learning process. The second concept that we want to highlight is student metacognition. And what we mean by that, simply put, is thinking about one's own thinking, or in this context, one's own learning. Teaching students how to observe what they're doing as they're learning so that they can figure out what works for them and what might need to change in order for learning to move forward. So again, we invite you to participate in a quick poll reflecting on your students' current use of metacognitive strategies. I know some people have joined us since the last poll. So again, the process for doing this is to read the statement. So my students use metacognitive strategies to reflect on their learning process. And you're going to select the letter that best represents the extent to which you think this is happening in your classroom or for your students. To vote, you're going to hover over the icon on the left side that looks like a square with an A in it, and you can select your response. Okay, great. I see a few people are starting to put in their votes. We'll give it just another few seconds. Okay, let's see if I share that out. Okay, great. So again, I know we didn't have everyone respond, but we can see even among those who did respond, we did have quite a spread with just one person feeling that this isn't happening at all in their classroom, many people who feel like it's happening to a small extent. So in comparison to the last one we did with learning goals, this feels like something that might be slightly less embedded in folks' classrooms already. Metacognition is another area in which the research is very clear. So students who are more metacognitive, meaning they have and use strategies for thinking about how they learn, are more successful. One body of research that we highlight in the course is Carol Dweck's work around the growth mindset. Formative assessment practice requires students to know their next steps in learning and to understand that through effort and work they can attain those next steps, whatever their starting point. In a formative assessment classroom, students are not measured by how smart they are, and as a result, grades become less important as a measure of success. Rather, through a variety of changes in classroom practice, students come to understand that everyone is at some point in their learning, and our job as learners is to understand where we are so we can take the next step forward. As Dweck's research points out, this teaches students resiliency. We also know that this teaches students the 21st century skills that are measured by the Maryland College and Career Ready standards, because students have more opportunities in the classroom to articulate what they know, defend their responses, and use evidence. Dweck's research also suggests that metacognition must be explicitly taught. Teachers play a role in creating opportunities for students to think about their own learning, and sometimes pointing it out to students when they're doing something that's leading to success. So in Patricia's classroom, we heard her doing a lot of questioning, not just about the content, but about student processes. So for example, she would ask, well, how do you know that? What strategies or resources did you use to figure it out? Which prompted students to reflect on what their process had been. In addition, she modeled metacognition, sometimes by using good scientists as a model, so as in saying something like, we know that good scientists always check their work, and sometimes she would use herself as a model, so saying something like, when I make a mistake and use a feeling word to describe what the mealworm is doing, I stop and ask myself, is that something I can hear, see, or feel? Her students also use science notebooks to regularly reflect on their work and set goals for the next day's lesson. In the next video clip, you'll see an elementary classroom where students are learning metacognitive skills. And we selected this because it illustrates some concrete examples of what teaching metacognition can look like, and also because it shows that this can be done effectively even with young students.
Let's debrief what we just did. There was some good thinking going on at the tables, and sometimes it takes a long time to figure out how the words go together. And every group eventually figured out that there was one half of the words that were positive characteristics and one half that were negative characteristics. Now I saw some interesting thinking going on as I was circulating around the tables when you had to fill in the blank cards with opposite words. And a few of the groups did something that I'd like to bring to everyone's attention. Happy, unhappy, agreeable, disagreeable, attentive, inattentive. I wonder if you noticed anything. What did this group do, this group did it as well over here, to change happy to the opposite, which is unhappy. Agreeable to disagreeable. Attentive to inattentive. Just think in your heads for a moment. Now quickly talk with a shoulder partner, making sure everyone's included.
Yeah, it's really like a consistent in the beginning of the word. It's just going to the main word.
If Diva, Shirani, and Kajol's group could share their conversation, because I sort of listened in, and I like what I heard. Can you tell the class what you noticed about these words? If somebody's comfortable speaking, okay, Diva, go ahead.
Like for the negative words, sometimes they have prefixes like under this, and they're mostly opposites.
And they're mostly opposites. So by putting the prefix on. And how did you decide which prefixes to put on? Because look at this group had unattentive, then they crossed it out and put inattentive. What if I said dishappy? We know that dis and un means the opposite. Dishappy, does that sound right? No. So I'm wondering what you were thinking in your heads before you decided which prefix to put on. Talk with your people again. How did you decide?
Yeah, because like maybe people can't like read it. So you have to make sure people can read it.
So let's hear some sharing then. What were you thinking? Ayub?
Thinking that it had to make sense before you write down what you were going to put, even that they both mean like if it's negative, but you have to make sure it makes sense before you write it down.
Thank you. That's great thinking. So Ayub said a lot of them can make a word negative, but you have to think, does that make sense before writing it down? Or does it sound right? What were you thinking, Anson?
Unhappy is actually the right way. Dishappy doesn't sound properly.
Yeah, it doesn't sound proper. We don't talk like that, right? Good thinking, everyone. Give yourself a big pat on the back. That was good word work this morning. Okay.
Okay, so again, we invite you to reflect on what you saw in the video and respond to the questions that you see on the slide in the chat. So how were students reflecting on their learning processes? And what strategies did the teacher use to support students' metacognition? A few things that you may have noticed were that the teacher first gave them time to think and an opportunity to talk to peers, not just about the content, but about their strategies, almost as if this was an additional learning goal in the class in addition to the content. The second thing that she did was she acknowledged that mistakes or getting stuck are okay, and in fact that they're part of the learning process. Like she said, sometimes this takes a long time. By teaching students how to notice their own progress and identify what it was that enabled that success, the teacher promoted a growth mindset and metacognition. The theme, professional learning, particularly in Module 4, helps teachers develop strategies for teaching metacognition through the idea of a growth mindset and specific strategies for creating the classroom culture in which mistakes are not seen as something to be embarrassed by, but as a normal part of the learning process. Module 4 also focuses on providing opportunities for students to reflect on their own learning and identify the gap between their current performance and where they want to go, and teaching students strategies that they can use to self-correct and take next steps to move closer to that goal within their zone of proximal development.
I'm interested in the comments that people are giving in the chat and how many things were happening in the very short clips that we saw that helped students move forward in their learning. And several of you talked about how the students were respectful, they really listened to each other, and they attended to what were those next steps that students need in order to move forward. Both the teachers did that, we saw, and also the students did that as well. In this final concept, as we work through our webinar content today, we'll cover how teachers and students work to give feedback in learning. We've discussed this idea of internalizing learning goals, in other words, having students be able to answer the question, where am I going? And we've also discussed using metacognition so that students can answer the question, where am I now? Formative assessment also requires students to be able to articulate where to next and how will I get there. In order to help students answer those questions, teachers in formative assessment classrooms learn how to give effective feedback. We've heard from teachers with whom we've worked that giving effective feedback is the single biggest change in their daily instructional routines when they adopt formative assessment. Why is it such a big change? Providing effective feedback involves teachers understanding where each student in the classroom is vis-a-vis the learning goal, and teachers have to be ready in the moment to provide guidance that meets students where they are and helps take them those next steps that they need to take forward. Many teachers we work with tell us that they thought they did this before we worked together, and that as our work progressed, they realized they had a lot to learn in this area. But teachers also report that they were delighted to change, and this is a place where we saw kind of immediate understanding of how helpful the process of understanding and rethinking how you give feedback in the classroom can be. So I asked you to think about how many of you as teachers have spent countless hours grading and writing comments only to have the majority of students in the class look at that grade and not read any of the comments that you spent all that time on, or worse, possibly just taking the whole paper that you've worked so hard on as well and they've worked hard on and throw that right in the trash. Or at the same level, how many people as teachers have asked students to incorporate feedback that they've given, and then that feedback is not represented in the next draft of work? These are things that formative assessment really shifts, and teachers appreciate the work that FAME is focused on in that it's designed to help teachers move from these summative graded feedback processes to feedback that takes place during the instructional cycle and is tightly aligned to the learning goal. So as we think about this, let's do this next poll together to think about how feedback takes place in the environments where you work. So in my classroom, or if you're an administrator in my school, students are accustomed to receiving feedback to clarify what they've done well and using that feedback to guide their next steps in learning. And let's see your responses to that. Again, hovering over the poll and choosing A, B, C, or D as it reflects you. And we're just going to give a moment more. We see a couple of people have not yet filled it out. And that looks good to me. So let's see what our collective graph is. There we go. So interesting, we see that there's the most responses are at C, that this is something that folks are working on and moving forward with, so that that's happening to some extent. Just a few people on either side of that. And what we want to move to in the FAME work is really getting all of the teachers who participate up to that level of D to take that next step as folks are moving in that direction. And this really is the foundation of that change in classroom culture that was mentioned in several of the comments that people gave in the chat. They saw in both the peer tutoring and also the student metacognition piece, where not only is the teacher giving feedback and helping students use that feedback, but also where the students themselves have the skills and knowledge to give effective feedback to each other. A pithy statement that you often hear in the formative assessment literature is that formative assessment is not formative unless something is formed as a result of the assessment. In this webinar, we've not yet spoken a lot about the process of assessing students. Our focus really has been on the culture of learning and how the role of the student shifts in a formative classroom. Taking a step back, assessment and its related evidence can take many forms. It could be in the form of a classroom discussion, a quiz, a series of questions, a performance task. But whatever is done in the formative process, something must be formed by that evidence. The simplest way to use evidence to inform next steps is to provide effective feedback based on that evidence. There's a robust research base that examines the characteristics of effective feedback. As you see on the slide, in Knowing What Students Know, for example, which is one of the best summaries of work around cognition and student learning, really that's been done in the last 20 years, the authors highlight the critical role of feedback in learning. For example, they say here, in the classroom, providing students with information about particular qualities of their work and about what they can do to improve is crucial for maximizing learning. Susan Burkhardt takes this a step further and explains that feedback is needed to guide students to their next steps in learning, but it should not do the work for them. She says feedback should be specific enough that the student knows what to do next, but not so specific that you do the work. And that's something that we heard Laura talking about when she talked about the classroom that we visited in the science classroom, where one of the big shifts that the teacher had through using formative assessment effectively was putting more cognitive load on the students and not answering their questions for them, but asking more questions and encouraging the inquiry cycle. Hattie and Timperley clarified the power of feedback in their powerful meta-analysis, which showed that feedback compared to other interventions at the school level and at the classroom level can be one of the most powerful interventions. They also help us to understand that there is effective and ineffective feedback. Hattie and Timberley's work reminds us of something that many of us have experienced personally, where we've received feedback that is harmful or shuts us down. The process of helping teachers use feedback is to identify what the more effective kinds of feedback are and to eliminate from any practice feedback processes that can unintentionally harm learning. Creating those classroom routines so that giving and receiving feedback becomes a regular classroom process involves a big shift for teachers who may have been accustomed to thinking that they own or are primarily responsible for the content in a classroom. As we've seen today, again, it's not just the teachers giving feedback, but in order for there to be a culture of feedback use, students must also learn to give and receive feedback. So we're going to go back now to Patricia's science class. In our observation, we saw that at the end of her lesson, Patricia invited her students, all covered with mealyworm dirt, to give her feedback on how she could improve the learning goals and success criteria. This was such an effective and powerful moment. This very underused strategy that the teacher employed to ask the students for feedback on how she did as a teacher helped students learn how to give feedback. Patricia modeled for her students that getting feedback helps her own learning and that she can use feedback from students to improve her own lesson planning. As a result of our work on formative assessment, Patricia reported to us that this was one of the biggest changes that she made in terms of how she taught students to use feedback and modeled those feedback practices. She also taught students to give feedback to each other in very useful ways. We saw that in our observation when we can recall a very young student in a second grade classroom giving some students to appear when she wasn't prompted to at all. She said, I think that's a feeling word you use. Can you make that observation using a sense word? And we all laughed because it was exactly the success criteria and she had done it so well. During our closing class activity when we ran the Rhode Island Formative Assessment Pilot, Patricia, as one of 40 or so teachers in the group, said to her colleagues that the big change in formative assessment that for her was that she learned to trust her students to do the learning. And we truly saw evidence of that in her classroom. We're going to do one final clip today, and this speaks to the concept of what we just spoke about teachers changing practice to learn how to incorporate feedback effectively, similar to what we just described from Patricia's classroom. We chose this video because it has excellent content, but we also want to recognize that this is from a British neighborhood high school. It's a typical neighborhood school, but in the United Kingdom, students at all levels wear uniforms to school, so it may look more similar to what the American model might think of as a private school. They're also discussing a British thing, so we just wanted to highlight what that was. They're discussing the use of an A-star rubric. This rubric is a nationally developed tool that's the grading rubric for the A-level test, a national subject-based test that high school students in the UK take. This, interestingly, on the surface, this video looks a little bit like a teach to the test activity. You'll notice that students are using the rubric, however, to understand quality responses and thinking about things like the level of detail that's needed to make a sound argument or the types of content that needs to be included to build a persuasive essay. Then students are asked to apply these quality criteria and evaluate each other's work against the same high expectations. We'll come back to this idea of what the teacher's role is, and as you watch this, we encourage you to look at what the teacher has done to change her practice and how she describes that in the way that she thinks about modeling and supporting students to do this work.
Assessment for learning has revolutionised the way that I teach. I used to be very didactic, very talk and talk. And I think that's how I was trained to teach. But since then, my teaching has changed, and I take a step back, and the students take much more responsibility for their own learning. And it does mean that it's a much more interactive environment within the classroom. Next, you'll find that on your desk you've got an example of an answer that somebody's given to a business question. Could you have a look at that for me, please? What I'd like you to do is look at it and tell me whether you would have given it an A star. You've got the leveled mark scheme there. You're used to using these. You've got highlighted pens on your desk if you want them. Is that an A star answer? Okay, be ready to tell me in 5 minutes' time whether it is.
Heavy rainfall. Heavy rainfall, the ground is completely saturated in water. I reckon it's level 3 then.
So tell me what you thought of this answer.
I think it's very good. The only thing I'd say is it's lacking some keywords.
Such as?
Where it says water running across the stuff, they could have just said self-strong and used keywords.
Yeah, good, okay. And we know that keywords are important, don't we, for a level 3 answer. Okay, excellent. Thanks, boys. The reason that I modelled the answer initially on rivers was because I wanted students to see what an A-star answer looked like. And that's one of the things we have to do in Assessment for Learning, is actually show the students what we want them to produce as their end product. Because only by showing them what we want can the students actually identify what it is that they need to do in order to actually produce that piece of work. Who can give me a couple of reasons why this is an A-star answer? What's so good about it?
Well, it's got the named river example, which is the River Rhine.
Mm-hmm.
It's got comprehensive and accurate place-specific statements. For example, it tells us about Switzerland, and I have 3 developed statements describing different causes of flooding. For example, it received 3.5 times its annual monthly rainfall.
Okay, and we've got several of those statements within that text, haven't we, which is excellent. Okay, so this is the sort of detail that we're looking for our A-star answers, and by the end of this lesson I want you guys to have tried to have written an A-star answer as well. Not for this question, but for a settlement question about the village of Lair. And had a look at your work. You're getting on really well. Many of you are using that mark scheme very effectively indeed. What I'm going to ask you guys to do now is actually to give each other some feedback by actually doing some peer assessment. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to swap your work on your tables, use that mark scheme and decide what level you think the student is at the moment. And then I'd like you to write them some targets about what they need to do to make sure that they are improving that answer.
So I'm going to first assess the consequences, list my causes, and give my locational details. Okay. You did everything good. You gave lots of locational detail. You named the motorways, all your ideas were developed, and your only thing is to give a push factor, because you gave the consequences of that, and you gave a consequence as well.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I felt you did well. You put a lot of causes, even though you didn't do the consequences, you've done a lot of causes. But I think you need to develop them a bit more, saying why it's happening and where it's happening. That's it. I gave you 4 marks for the causes. Yeah, for the causes, but you need to do the consequences as well. I give you 6 marks.
In the long run, Assessment for Learning can save you an awful lot of time, particularly with marking, which is one of the most onerous tasks a teacher has. The slight problem with there is that I am concerned that there is this expectation that teachers do mark books, and I am conscious all the time of having this sort of person on my shoulder saying, where are your comments? And that's one of the reasons why I use the verbal feedback stamp, because I think it is important that parents are aware, inspectors, should they come in, are aware that yes, we are monitoring this. So what you want to do then, obviously, to move yourself up is do what?
And develop the answers
Good.
further and explain.
Excellent. And you're beginning to get in some of your key detail here, and which level does that come from on the mark scheme?
Level 2.
Is it? You've got your specific statements, haven't you? M1 and 6 and 69?
Oh, that's more level 3 then.
That's more level 3, isn't it? Okay.
But you can only get level 3 if you then talk about both in development.
That's right, exactly. Okay, so you know what you need to do now to make it better, yeah?
Good.
Thanks.
As we unpack this clip, we invite you to share your responses in the chat, as I see people are already doing. As folks are writing, we'll just point out a couple of things that come to mind as we look at this video, and we know there's much more to unpack. So we're looking forward to hearing your comments as well. This video exemplifies the process of modeling that students themselves, in order to do this well, must learn this process. Like any new skill that we ask of students, to be successful, student learning has to be scaffolded and supported by the teacher. In this example, students first use an exemplar response to clarify and better understand what is expected of different qualities of work. Then, once they had begun to internalize those success criteria, they were asked to give peer feedback to help students identify areas of focus for revision. In FAME, we showcase how to design peer assessment as a vehicle to help students get better at self-assessment, which is always the ultimate goal. As Dill and William highlighted when we began our webinar today, reviewing sample work products and having a chance to see how work is accomplished by peers builds skills that students can use over time to become more effective self-assessors. To do this well, students must have internalized the learning goals as well as the expectations for quality work. Through FAME, teachers will practice developing and using effective feedback that is linked to success criteria. The FAME Professional Learning has teachers develop learning progressions and other strategies and tools so that they can do the hardest part of formative assessment, which is to quickly consider and help frame what students need next to do in their own learning. During FAME, teachers will be asked to establish new routines that provide classroom structures that allow for feedback to take place. These structures might include conferencing, small group work, and various kinds of peer interactions. Finally, FAME provides guidance to teachers around how to structure formative peer feedback using a gradual release model, whereby teachers, much as we saw in this video, first model, then teach feedback, and then provide structured support to students as they practice with their peers. As we come to the end of today's webinar, we hope you've had a chance to think about the changes that take place as teachers and schools implement classroom formative assessment. As you explore the idea of being part of FAME Professional Learning next year, we hope this webinar help you to better understand course expectations and outcomes for your faculties and colleagues. At the same time, we know that many of you who are considering bringing others on board for the FAME training may encounter some common challenges and pushback. First, many teachers start this work by saying, quote, "we already do this," or, quote, "that's just good teaching." I would tell you what our teachers have told us during our training sessions, that formative assessment has asked them to rethink and become much more intentional about how they approach teaching and learning and how they think about and plan for the role of the student. Similarly, you may hear that because someone does common formative assessment at their site, that they are already doing formative assessment. These aren't the same. And we know that to be true because in the practice of using common formatives, there might in fact be absolutely no change in the role of students as learners or in the teaching process. As we've seen today, formative assessment requires a significant shift in these roles, and in particular provides new ways of thinking about how we engage students to support their learning. In a moment, we're going to pass the webinar over to Denise to share information about the registration process. Before we do that, we're interested in learning your thoughts about what we shared today. So I'm going to pause, and I'd love it if you would just write a statement or something that you got out of this webinar that represents a change in the role of teachers and students in the formative assessment process. When you're ready, just enter that into the chat. We know these won't be fully formed thoughts yet, but just based on something you heard and have seen today, to think about that and move that forward. And I'm just going to pick up on one of the, oh excellent, I'm going to pick up on one of the concepts that was said a little bit earlier about the role of peer feedback often being more powerful than teacher feedback. That's an amazing change for me in my work in thinking about the role of learners supporting each other in some very powerful ways. And we know that teachers, many teachers we work with say they've tried that in the past and it hasn't been very effective. And what we also know is that when you work with students to internalize the learning goals in a much deeper way and help them understand what good feedback looks like, that really helps that process along and builds the capacity for peer assessment to be so powerful. I see some fantastic feedback here. And so this is great and gives us a lot to think about and move forward with in these next steps. And I can sense from this that there's lots of new information that folks are thinking about in terms of what the end result will be of the same work over the course of the next year. So I'm going to turn this over to Denise now and give her an opportunity to talk about the registration process.
Thanks, Nancy and Laura. We're really excited here at MSD, our team, to get this started and to bring all this great professional learning to the schools and really begin implementing this. So the first thing I'd like to share is that we have opened our registration. I know we've been talking about this for a long time and really getting excited about getting started, but we have officially have a online registration. The link, Kyla is copying the link in the chat box if you would like to copy it so you have a live link. We also will be emailing all of this information out within the next couple of days, the PowerPoint slides, the registration information, things you might need to go ahead and get started. But just a couple of things about the registration. We are asking that schools register as a group. So when you go to the registration, you'll see that there is a place to provide the school and your county and then all the names of people who are interested in your school and participating. If you did not have a chance to participate in our March 18th webinar, that's where we really laid out the professional learning design and what the professional learning is going to look like starting this summer and moving into next school year. So it might be helpful if you have not viewed that webinar to go ahead and view the archive of that. And that is located on our MSDE Fame blog spot that Kyla is going to copy into the chat box right now. Melissa Finkel from our team has done a great job of creating this blog, as you may call it. All of our archived webinars are there. The registration for the Fame is there. Everything you pretty much need to go ahead and get started. So that's a great resource if you would like some more background information of the professional learning design or anything that we may have covered previously. We are asking that registration be completed by April 23rd. We know that seems like it might be a quick turnaround, but I know many of you have expressed interest in this for many months. So we want to go ahead and get our numbers together so that we can secure the locations for our summer leadership training at the end of July. We'll have within the 4 regions a north, or a central, a west, an east, and a southern leadership training where we'll be asking a principal or assistant principal from each school participating to come with at least one other person from their team that can act as a teacher leader. It might be someone who already has coaching or has a lead teacher position, someone who can support other teachers in the school as you go through the professional learning next year. We are also completely open to coming out to your schools and talking at faculty meetings if you'd like us to help build some awareness with your staff, if you'd like us to come talk to principals at a principal meeting, if you'd just like us to have a one-on-one phone call with a principal or a small group of teachers, we're more than happy to do that to answer any questions specific to your needs or your school that you have. what we're going to do is we're going to collect that registration information and we are going to send it to our district contacts, because really it has to be the district that's going to go ahead and recommend schools and teachers to participate. The great thing is it's pretty much open to everyone. The summer training is really the only training that we're limiting to the administrator and one other person. So your teams in your school can really can have as many participants as you would like. Again, so the blog is a great place to get your archived webinars and any registration information. Laura, if you can switch to the last slide where our emails are, we can leave that up for you. The next, yeah. So our email and phone numbers are here if you would like to contact us directly. And again, we will be sending out this information through email. I see that it is 5 o'clock. I am more than happy to stay and answer any questions you have, but I recognize we all have evening commitments. So if you do need to log off and your questions have not been answered, please email or call. We'll be more than happy to help. And if you have any questions right now that you would like to ask in the chat box, please feel free to do so, and we will try to answer them the best that we can now. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing many questions. I'm going to give a few more minutes in case you're, reflecting and thinking, and we'll look for a couple more minutes for those questions. Please feel free to contact us directly tomorrow or in the next couple of days if you'd like to do that. Was this part of the series that I need to sign up for? Well, that's a good question. This is the second of a series of 4 webinars that we were having with Nancy and Laura, but they're not necessarily that you have to participate in all 4. We hope that you do. I will say that March 18th webinar did give a lot of information about the professional learning design and what this might actually look like, and what would be some of the responsive requirements for teachers in schools. So if you go to our blog and you go to the March 18th webinar that's archived there, that might give you that specific information. And we will be having 2 more webinars that I forgot to mention. May 6th from 4 to 5, we'll be talking about forming communities of practice, so teachers can work together, supporting each other through the formative assessment process. And then Why Leadership Matters, May 13th from 3:30 to 4:30. Again, we hope you can join in those, but they are not necessarily a requirement. Did I say it wrong? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think that we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you can participate in our next 2 webinars. And if you have any more questions, please do not hesitate to email or call. And again, this webinar will also be archived that you'll be able to find on the blog or on MSDE's Blackboard. Thank you.